There is a pastor standing at an open window on the southeast coast of Sweden, and he is listening to bells. It's the summer of 1885. His name is Carl Boberg. A storm has just come through, one of those fast, violent ones that darkens the whole sky and then, almost as quickly, is gone. The air is washed clean. The bay in front of him has gone flat and bright as a mirror. And across the water, he can hear bells. Now, the way the story usually gets told, this is the pretty part. A rainbow over the bay, a songbird in the trees, a greeting card moment that produces a greeting card hymn. But that's not what Boberg himself said he heard. In his own account, there is no rainbow. The bells he was listening to across that calm water were funeral bells. Someone had died, and the tune those bells were playing was an old one about eternity, about a saved soul being called home to its rest. So the most triumphant worship song most of us know, the one we belt at the top of our lungs, was born in a man standing at a window listening to a funeral. That evening, he sat down and wrote 9 verses. He called it O Stor Gud, O Great God. And there was one thing he could not have known. He had not finished the song. He had barely started it. What he had written was the first hand it would pass through, because this song was going to take 100 years, 4 languages, a half-dozen countries, and some of the darkest years the next century would produce to finish. And almost every person who added to it was going to be someone who had lost nearly everything. Formation to transformation. How great thou art, the true story. You have sung this song. You've probably led it, and you do not know who wrote it. I mean that as a real fact, not as a setup. Most hymns have an author, a name in the corner of the page. This one does not. Not really, because no single person wrote it. The song you sing on a Sunday was assembled over about 100 years by strangers who mostly never met each other, who spoke different languages, who lived in different countries, and who kept handing it forward, each one adding a piece out of their own life until it finally reached you. I want to trace that whole journey for you, because the journey is the sermon, and by the time we get to the end, to your Sunday, to the moment those words come up on your screen, I think you're going to lead this song differently than you ever have. So let me take you back to the window. Carl Boberg was a minister, a writer, an editor, and eventually a member of the Swedish parliament. But in 1885, he was mostly a young preacher in a movement that was not welcome. We forget this, but the free church people in Sweden in that era, the Baptists and the mission friends, the ones Boberg ran with, were a persecuted minority. The state church did not want them. According to his own family, the song he wrote, O Stor Gud, was used in what they called the underground church, sung by people who could get in trouble for singing it. Sit with that for a second. The single most confident song about the greatness of God that the modern church owns was written by a man in a pressured, unwelcome, minority church, and its first home was among people who had to be careful where they sang it. And what did he reach for? Not a new idea. He reached for Psalm 8. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have ordained, what is man that you think of him? That's the bones of the whole thing. Boberg looked at a storm and a calm sea and a sky washed clean, the works of God's fingers, and he did what the psalmist did. He got small on purpose. He let the size of God put him in his place. The poem got set to an old Swedish folk tune, the kind of melody that already felt like it belonged to everybody. It got sung for the first time in a country church in 1888. By 1891, all 9 verses were in a songbook, and that, as far as Boberg knew, was that, a local hymn in a small movement in one language on one coast of one country. He had no idea it was about to leave home. A song travels a certain way when nobody is managing it. It gets overheard. A wealthy German-speaking nobleman named Manfred von Glen heard O Stor Gud among the Swedish-speaking people of Estonia, and he loved it enough to translate it into German. So now the song is in a second language, Wie groß bist du, moving through German-speaking Europe. And from the German, it got translated again, this time into Russian in 1912 by a man named Ivan Prokhanov. They called Prokhanov the Martin Luther of Russia. He was the great Protestant hymn writer and translator of his country, and he put this song into Russian and published it in a hymn book in St. Petersburg. Now look at that date, 1912. Do you know what is about to happen in Russia? In 5 years, the whole world of Russian faith is going to be set on fire. Revolution. Then decades of a government that treats the church as an enemy to be crushed. Prokhanov himself will eventually die in exile. So the song does not travel a safe road. It walks straight into the worst place it could go. It goes into Russia, right before Russia becomes one of the most dangerous places on earth to be a Christian. And that is exactly where the next person is going to find it. Not in spite of the danger, in the middle of it. In 1931, an English missionary named Stuart Hines and his wife Mercy were doing evangelistic work up in the Carpathian mountains, in what was then Soviet Ukraine. And somewhere up in those mountains, Hines heard it, the Russian version, the one that had come from the German, that had come from the Swedish, that had started at a window a lifetime and a continent away. He did not know that whole history. He just knew the song wrecked him. So he and Mercy learned it in Russian and started using it. And Hines started doing something more than translating. He started writing new verses of his own in Russian as things happened to him. And I cannot get past what comes next. There is a verse in this hymn that most of you have sung 100 times, and it was written down in a doorway, off the lips of strangers in the middle of the single most important moment of their lives. This is what happened. Up in one of those mountain villages, the only believers Hines knew of were a man named Dmitri and his wife Ludmila. Ludmila had taught herself to read from a Bible a Russian soldier had left behind in their house years before. She had learned to read on the Word of God because a man who carried a gun left his Bible behind. One day, the Hines came to Dmitri's house, and before they could even knock, they heard Ludmila inside. She was reading out loud to a house full of people from the Gospel of John. She was reading the part about the crucifixion. And the people in that house were not just listening, they were repenting, right then, out loud, coming to Jesus as she read. Hines and Mercy did not go in. He said he was not about to interrupt what the Holy Spirit was so obviously doing. So they stood outside the door in a Ukrainian mountain village, and they listened to a room full of strangers being born again. And Stuart Hines took out something to write with, and he wrote down the phrases those people were saying as they repented. Those phrases, the actual words of actual peasants coming to Christ in a doorway, became the third verse. And when I think that God, his son not sparing, sent him to die, I scarce can take it in. That's not a hymn writer's clever line. That is a transcript. That is what it sounds like when people who have nothing meet the cross for the first time. But you cannot tell this part without telling what was happening around it, because the darkness is not the backdrop of this song. The darkness is where the song was made. While Hines was in Ukraine, Stalin was starving it. The Holodomor, a man-made famine that killed millions of people. The Hines had to get out, and then, just a few years later, the whole continent went up, the Second World War. They had to flee Europe entirely and go back to Britain. So track what the song is now. It started with a persecuted Swede. It passed through a Russian about to be crushed. It got a verse from Ukrainian peasants in a famine, and now it is in the hands of a refugee who has run from Stalin and run from Hitler and is starting over in a foreign country. This is not a comfortable person's song. It has never once been a comfortable person's song. And it's not finished. There's one more verse to write, and it comes out of the deepest grief in the whole story. After the war, Britain was full of the displaced, people with no home to go back to. Hines spent himself on them, and in 1948, he and another man visited a camp in Sussex full of Russians who had been scattered by the war. There was a man there. During the very end of the war, he had been separated from his wife, and he had not seen her since. When they were separated, she was a believer and he was not. But in the years since, alone, he had come to faith. Now he was a Christian, and all he wanted in the world was to find her and tell her so they could believe together at last. And he did not think he ever would. He had made his peace with the fact that he would not see his wife again on this side of the ground. The only reunion he had left to hope for was the day Jesus comes back, the day every wrong thing gets undone and every separated person gets found. That was the only hope he had, and it was enough to keep him standing. Stuart Hines listened to that man, and he wrote the last verse. When Christ shall come, with shout of acclamation, and take me home, what joy shall fill my heart. The most hopeful verse in the entire hymn, the one about Jesus coming back and joy filling your heart, was written for a man who had lost his wife and did not expect to find her again until the resurrection. That is the last brick in the song, and now you know something you didn't know an hour ago. Every single verse of How Great Thou Art was added by someone in the dark. A persecuted preacher, a crushed church, peasants in a famine, a refugee, a man who lost his wife. The most triumphant song about the bigness of God was built, verse by verse, out of the smallest and most broken circumstances human beings can be in. Hines finished the English version in 1949 and printed it in a little magazine he sent out to the refugees in 15 countries. That's the whole marketing plan, a refugee ministry newsletter. And from there, it did the thing the song always does. It got overheard. It jumped to America, though nobody can quite agree how. One story has it carried by a missionary to a conference on Long Island. Another has an evangelist finding it sung by a tribal choir in India and bringing it back to a camp in California. Both might be true. And that's how the song moves. A music publisher in California, a man named Tim Spencer, who had been a singing cowboy before he met Jesus, bought the rights. His editors changed a couple of Hines words, and then it landed in the one place that would take it around the planet. In 1950s, Billy Graham's team got handed a pamphlet with this song in it in London. At first, they set it aside. Then they tried it in Toronto in 1955. And in 1957, they brought it to Madison Square Garden in New York, and it broke open. The man who ran Graham's music, Cliff Barrows, said they sang How Great Thou Art 100 times during that New York campaign. 100. Not because it was on the schedule, because, in his words, the people would not let them stop. The song that a persecuted Swede started at a funeral, that a nobleman carried into Germany, that the Martin Luther of Russia carried into a country about to burn, that got a verse from peasants in a doorway and a verse from a grieving refugee, that traveled the world in a newsletter for the displaced, walked into the biggest arena in America and would not sit down. Elvis recorded it and won a Grammy for it, twice. Today, there are more than 1,700 recordings of it. In poll after poll of the church's favorite hymns, it comes in second. The only song that beats it is Amazing Grace. And not one person wrote it. So this is what I actually want to hand you, worship leader, out of all of this. Because there are two things this song does to you once you know where it came from, and I think you need both. The first one is about the pressure you're under. You are handed a job week after a week that quietly tells you to be the source, be original, have the vision, curate the moment, build the experience. And a lot of us carry a low-grade sense that if the room does not move, it's because we did not generate enough, that we are the engine, that it starts with us. This song is the correction, because you did not write the worship you lead. None of us did. Boberg did not finish it. Hines did not start it. It came to you across 100 years and 4 languages, a famine and a war, hand in hand, each person adding what their own loss had taught them. And then it was placed, finished, in your hands to sing on an ordinary Sunday. You're not the author of this. You're the lightest person to be trusted with it. You are one voice in a line that runs back through Elvis, and a stadium, and a refugee camp, and a mountain doorway, and a funeral on a Swedish bay. That is not a demotion. It should be a relief. You were never supposed to be the source. You were supposed to receive it faithfully and pass it on clean. That's the whole job. And that goes for the whole team, not just the person with the set list. The volunteer at the back pushing these words to the screen is another hand this song passes through, another link in a chain of 100 years. The techs are worship leaders too, and the words land clean in the room because someone at a console decided they would. Every hand this song passes through on the way to your people is holding something a lot of people bled to build. The second thing is the one I care about more. Every verse of this song was written by someone in the dark. I keep coming back to that. Not one of them was comfortable. Not one of them was standing in a rainbow. The persecuted preacher, a crushed church, the peasants in the famine, the refugee, the man who lost his wife. The biggest view of God this song contains came from the smallest, most broken circumstances a person can be in. So if you're leading this song out of a hard season of your own, out of a year that did not go the way you planned, out of a grief you have not told anyone about, hear me. You are not disqualified from leading a song this big. You are exactly the kind of person who has always written it. Awe was never the property of the comfortable. The people who have sung How Great Thou Art the loudest have almost always been the people who had the least left. Your hard season does not make you a fraud up there. It might be the only thing that makes you honest. There is a line Billy Graham said about why he loved this song, and it's the whole point. He said, "It turns Christians' eyes toward God rather than upon themselves." That's what 100 Years of Strangers built. A song that makes God enormous and makes you small, and calls that good news. In a worship world that is constantly tempted to make the song about us, our moment, our feeling, our platform, this old smuggled hymn does the opposite. It gets you out of the center of the frame, and that's a mercy, not a loss. Go back with me to the window one more time. A young preacher on a Swedish coast, listening to funeral bells across a calm bay, getting small in front of a God he could not take the measure of. He wrote 9 verses and thought he was done. He had no idea that 100 years later, across an ocean he never crossed in a language he never spoke, people he would never meet would be singing his words back to God, with pieces added by a nobleman and a Russian, some peasants and a refugee, all of it carried on the backs of people who had lost almost everything. That is the song you're going to put on a screen this week. Not a worship set filler, a 100-year inheritance handed to you by the dispossessed that has one job, to turn your eyes and your people's eyes off of yourself and onto a God who is bigger than the whole long dark road the song traveled to get there. So when you lead it, do not perform it. Receive it, and then hand it on clean, the way it was handed to you. The Lord be with you in the room, and I'll see you in the next one.